something's gone wrong. For all our vigilance and battle scars over the Bill of Rights, have we let the flame of freedom's torch grow cold? Because there can be no torch to pass where there's no flame. Freedom has only one enemy it cannot defeat, and that is negligence. So your presence here, now, today, is an act of reverence. Of all man's works beneath the heavens, none shines brighter than our Constitution. I think Jefferson and Paine, Adams, Madison, Mason, Franklin, I think they're looking down right now at us. I think they understand what we're trying to do, what we strive to do. Every time our country stands in the path of danger, an instinct seems to summon her finest first, those who truly understand her. When freedom shivers in the cold shadow of true peril, it's always the patriots who first hear the call. When loss of liberty is looming, as it is now, the siren sounds first in the hearts of freedom's vanguard.
Good evening, everybody. Joe Joseph here for another exciting edition of Freedomlink Radio on Thursday, December the 16th, 2010. Well, let me tell you, folks, very interesting guest we have this evening. G. Edward Griffin joins the broadcast. And before we get to our guest tonight, let me bring in my valiant co-hosts. First, of course, is the incredible Johnny Bag of Donuts King. Johnny, are you there, buddy? Johnny.
Yes, unmuting the switchboard helps. I'm here.
Thank you, sir. And, of course, the other Griff. My switchboard input here is having a little difficulty, it seems. So I will have him on in just a jiffy here. Just stand by, folks. Oh, well, thanks, Griff. I appreciate that.
my switchboard's working fine down here.
I know. Hey, wait a minute. Now, does the 1995 Radio Shack phone really have a switchboard? You know?
Well, it has magical powers.
That much I will give you, my friend. It certainly does that. Now, folks, a little bit of background on G. Edward Griffin. Of course, he is a documentary filmmaker. He's wrote a couple of books, actually more than a couple of books, but his most famous, to me at least, is The Creature from Jekyll Island, which I thought, and Griff, I'm sure you agree, was a very good book and telling book about the Federal Reserve and its history. So, without further ado, let me bring him on board. Mr. Griffin, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Outstanding. It's so wonderful to have you on the show, sir.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Hey, no problem. Well, let's get right into it. We've seen a lot of talk about, QE1, QE2, the printing press, and, of course, a lot of the problems that we have these days, especially with our economy, deals directly or is attributed to the Federal Reserve. Could you speak a little bit to that and how it's gotten to be so bad in this country?
Well, I guess that's a big topic, isn't it?
It sure is.
Actually, I don't think there's much need to describe how bad it has become because most people have a pretty good idea of that.
Mm-hmm.
They may not understand why it is that way and how it got that way. And even if they did understand, the underlying question is why? Why was it allowed? And was it accidental? Was it on purpose? Were there hidden agendas? All of these things come into a question like that. So I think that the best way to tackle such a big can of worms is to start at the beginning and deal with the issue of what is money and what is our money in particular, and how did it come into being. And that's where the Federal Reserve System comes in, because, you see, money in the United States is created by this thing called the Federal Reserve System. That comes as no big surprise to most people, even though they don't understand what the Fed is. They've heard that. But now, here's where the surprise comes in. The Federal Reserve System is a cartel. It's not a government agency, and that's the surprise, and that is, in fact, the root of this whole problem. The fact that way back in 1913, Congress passed a law which gave the power to create money, the nation's money, gave it to a private group of banks that formed into a cartel. And when I say a cartel, I mean it's no different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel, a sugar cartel. This one happens to be a banking cartel, which means it's made up of all of the giant players in the field. They came together back in 1910 is actually when they met together and began to formulate this plan, and it took them 3 years to finally get it enacted through Congress. So it became law in 1913. But in that 3-year period, the big banks of the United States, with their very close financial connections to the biggest banks in Europe as well, came together and they created a cartel. And like all cartels, the purpose of it was to preserve their position, to control competition, and to enhance their profits. And by rigging the price of their product, which is the interest rates on their loans. And to rig the source of supply, which is the ability to create money. They were given that power to create their own money, if you can imagine that, and not only their own, but the money of the country. And so that's where all the mischief began. And so naturally, since all these years have been under the control of the banking cartel, it should come as no surprise to anybody that during these years, the banking industry has done very well indeed, whereas the country itself has not done so well. And we see that really today in recent months and the last couple of years when the economy is flip-flopping and sliding down into the toilet, and the corporations are folding and banks are running out of money. And so the Federal Reserve comes to the fore, and they create trillions and trillions of dollars. And where does it go? Well, to the banks, of course. And if it doesn't go to the banks, it goes to the corporations, which are going bankrupt because they owe money to the banks, and they can't continue paying their loans. And so the money goes either directly to the banks or through the corporations so that they can send it to the banks to keep their loans alive. And people wonder, well, how come the banks are getting all this money? It's because they don't realize that the Federal Reserve is the banks. So you see, they're just paying themselves, and nobody understands it because they don't realize that the Federal Reserve System is a banking cartel. So that's kind of the quick answer to all of this. We have been caught in the snares of a giant scam ever since 1913. And because the economy has done fairly well over those years and people have prospered, nobody has questioned it too much. They thought, well, we're living well, right? So who cares?
Right.
A little scam here, a little scam there. So as long as I get my share of it, and I'm living well and driving a nice car, got a good job, and a big house, and so forth, then who cares? It's politics is that way. It's always a scam. So who cares? Well, now it's coming home to roost, and we should all care because it can't go on any further. It's reached the end of the line. There's no more. There's no more milking to be done. Now what they're doing is they're just creating money out of thin air so fast in such great quantities that there's no way in the world that can ever be paid back through normal productivity and realistic business activity. It's all going down the tube now.
Well, Mr. Griffin, my good buddy and co-host here, A.C. Griffith, he's done a lot of research into the Federal Reserve and a whole lot of other subjects. And I know, Griff, you're itching to talk to Mr. Griffin, so I will let you have the floor, my friend.
Mr. Griffin, it's a pleasure to meet you. May I call you by your first name?
Yes, absolutely.
And what is that, Edward? Ed.
Actually, it's my middle name is Edward. My first name is George, but most of my friends call me Ed or Edward.
Okay, Ed it is, and you call me Griff. We're separated by a few miles. I'm Welsh, and I think Griffin is more English than Welsh, I believe. Am I not right?
Well, it's English, but I understand that my branch of it is also came from Wales, so maybe we came from the same parts of the world.
Well, my goodness. It's nice to be with you, cousin. we come together. We come together surely in William Wallace Braveheart over in Scotland. He also was from the line of Welsh people. Wallace translates to the Welshman. So
I see.
I'm sure our mindset comes together in Braveheart. I know it does.
Well, I hope so. I know it does.
In this time, yes. I'm very proud of my Welsh connection, as I know you are too.
Yes.
Do you have any idea how to define the Federal Reserve note?
Yeah, it's an
How
interesting.
do you define it?
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's an interesting thing that basically he wants to know when you hold a Federal Reserve note in your hand, Mr. Griffin. What is it to you when you hold it in your hand?
What does the word note mean?
Well, the word note means it's an IOU, basically. That's a generalized way of saying it. It's somebody owes something to someone else, and the holder of the note is the person that, let me think this thing through so I don't say it wrong. If you hold the note, then somebody owes something to you. You are the note holder. And the person who issues the note is the, I guess we could call him the broker in this case, or the originator. See, let's just put it to the back up. If it was a basic transaction, and forget the Federal Reserve System, if let's see, if you gave me an ounce of gold, okay, and you asked me to hold it for you in safekeeping, I would give you a note and say,
right.
Okay, I've got your gold, I've got your note. I've got your gold. Here's my note, which is a promise to pay you the gold. All right, so you hold the note, and that means that I owe it to you. So the note holder is the person who holds something supposedly of value. I say supposedly because in this case the note is backed by gold in my example, but in the real world out there it's not backed by anything at all. So that's where it gets a little fuzzy because the note has lost its true meaning in the modern world. It used to be a note was, something of value because somebody owed something to you of value. But today when we hold a Federal Reserve note, there's nothing of value behind it. So, the only thing we can get for that Federal Reserve note is another one just like it. In terms of, and that's the bottom line.
It's exactly like you say, Mr. Griffin. It's a scam. It's a scam.
Yeah. And now let's take it one step further. It's a scam, all right, but it's almost a philosophical scam because, you see, if I held a note, or we held a note that said we were entitled to an ounce of gold, and that was what was backing that note, we could understand the value of the note because it would be stated right on there.
Sure.
But in the Federal Reserve notes have no value stated on it. They used to be like this dollar, this note, this Treasury note was, backed by 1 ounce of gold or silver to the bearer on demand. It was printed right on those notes, so we knew what it was that was behind it. Today, it just says United States government, or it says United States, and it says Federal Reserve note. It doesn't say what it's a note for or anything. It just says note. So it disappears. The value disappears. There's nothing really there. But nevertheless, there's something of value behind it, and it's rather frightening. What's backing that note is the power of the government to tax its citizens, which means people say, well, that money is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, and it makes you feel good all over, thinking, oh, yeah, the full faith and credit of the United States government. They're going to pay back that note or that bond or whatever it is. And how do they pay it back? They'll pay it back if they have to take everything you have through taxes to get it. They will pay it back. So that's really what backs these notes is the power of taxation and including the power of that invisible taxation called inflation. The note is really backed by you and by me and by our labor. That's what has finally wound up behind these notes. So it becomes almost a philosophical thing.
Does that answer your question, Griff? Maybe
in practice. Joe, are you hearing the audio?
Yes, I am.
Mm-hmm. That's my voice coming back at me.
Yeah, Yeah, that may be you, but I'm not hearing I'm not hearing an echo. I guess here's an interesting thing. Now, I looked at a Federal Reserve note from today, and I've looked at a Federal Reserve note circa, say, 1950. And if you take a look at the difference, first of all, at the bottom it says today, if you take a dollar bill, it says $1. That's it, $1. On the Federal Reserve note of 1950, it says paid to the bearer on demand, $1. And then up in the top where it says legal tender for all debts public and private, and the one in 1950, it says legal tender for all debts public and private, and can be presented at any Federal Reserve Bank for honest legal money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's that?
Well, in those days that was defined. It was legislatively and constitutionally defined as a certain weight of silver.
Mm-hmm.
I've forgotten exactly what it is, so many grams of silver or grains of silver, but it was a specified amount. And yes, you could in those days take that piece of paper into any Federal Reserve Bank or to the Treasury and demand that much silver, and you would get it. That's why they say to the bearer on demand.
Right. Isn't that
so
interesting?
It really had value.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you can take it to the Treasury and demand your honest money, and you get another piece of paper just like it when you took it in.
It's really amazing. The scam is just it's so hard sometimes to wrap your arms around it, because it's got so much. There's just so much deception and so much fraud laced into it that it's hard. And then fractional reserve banking. There's another thing too that the Federal Reserve enacted, where you put your money into the bank. Well, the bank only holds anywhere from 2 to 10% of that at any given time. And that's no good too. As a matter of fact, and I challenge anybody, go down to the bank and try and pull all your money out.
It's not money, Joe.
Well, yes, I know that, Griff. I know that.
Well, why do you call it money if it's not money?
Well, let me call it it.
That would be better.
Federal Reserve notes. Yeah.
Yes, let's call it X.
But Federal Reserve note is not $1, and it's not money. It's a note. It's a promissory note backed by no promise.
Exactly right. And another reason why they call it a bill. What's a bill? When you receive a bill, what do? You owe that person that gave you the bill money to pay your bill.
Well, nobody can define the word note legally in law except Black's Law Dictionary, a promissory note. But what is the promise? Nobody knows what the promise is, including the Fed, because there is no promise. The bills that Kennedy got through in 1963, $2 bills and $5 bills, were marked U.S. note at the top. That's probably one of the reasons he was snuffed. But those laws are still on the book, requiring government to print so many hundreds of millions of dollars in $2 and $5 bills. The Federal Reserve just culls them out of circulation. Now, what is a U.S. note? Is the note the same as a Federal Reserve note?
No, a U.S. note is an obligation of the United States Treasury, and a Federal Reserve note is an obligation of the Federal Reserve System, which is
does the word note mean the same thing in both instances?
Oh, I don't think you could make a strong case for that. I think probably technically it does, but in reality it doesn't. You know what I'm trying to say?
Well, what is it in the case of the U.S. note? What is the promise?
Well, my understanding of the U.S. note, it's a promise to return a certain amount of silver.
Right. It was a silver certificate. Mm-hmm.
A silver certificate, yeah.
Right.
Now, if the government, the Treasury today were to issue a note, it wouldn't mean the same thing.
No, these are not silver certificates.
No, I don't think they're silver certificates, no. If they were to issue one today, it wouldn't be, no.
But
now,
they're
the ones
still
you're
in
talking
circulation.
about for Kennedy, the ones for Kennedy might be backed by silver. I'd have to check that one out. It could well be. Mm-hmm. But there aren't many of those in circulation, and most of them are just collector's pieces,
But the law is still on the book requiring the government to put them in circulation. Nobody's ever taken the law off the book. Yeah.
That's right. It's still there. Mm-hmm.
It's very, very interesting. Now, I want to bring up something else that's a little bit. It kind of affects us all, and getting off the Federal Reserve for a second and moving on to just something a little bit different. You had the opportunity, Mr. Griffin, and this is by far my favorite interview you've ever done. You got to interview Norman Dodd in 1982, and what a fascinating interview that was. And I got to say, what great timing you had, because
that was almost accidental. It was certainly providential, as Washington would say.
Right. Now, what was the background on that? How did you come about to know Mr. Dodd and find out about him?
Well, just for your listeners, Norman Dodd was the former chief investigator for the Congressional Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations. It was called the Reese Committee, and that was formed right after World War II. And in the course of his work, he got to discover some rather explosive and shocking realities about some of the largest tax-exempt foundations, such as the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and, big outfits like that, the Rockefeller funds, and so forth. And it was certainly dynamite information, and I don't know how I came across it, but back in the early 1960s, I was an avid reader of reports that were put out by the various congressional investigating committees. I think I read just about all of them, and they were coming out almost daily. And one of those investigating committees had the testimony of Norman Dodd in it, and he was telling about what he discovered as an investigator, and he was telling about the fact that these so-called charitable organizations had agendas which had nothing to do with philanthropy at all, but that they were dedicated to spending their endowment funds in such a way as to change the character of the United States of America, to move it in the direction, and these were his words. He said he was quoting the president of the Ford Foundation at that time, who told him that the purpose of the Ford Foundation was to change life in America so that the United States and the Soviet Union could be comfortably merged someday in the future. And that, and if that isn't a blockbuster, I don't know what it would be. And so he was investigating this. How were these foundations spending their money under the guise of charity and philanthropy, but actually doing it in such a way as to bring about profound changes in the political and cultural and legal systems of our country? So anyway, I read that, and I thought, this is something that is a mind blower. And I said, I sure would like to meet this fellow. And I made a notation of where he lived. He lived in Virginia, not too far from Washington, D.C. And so it was about a year later, I believe, or maybe 2 years later, that I happened to be in Virginia, and I was putting together a documentary film on some topic. I've forgotten what it was right now, but I had a camera crew there. Mm-hmm. And we came to the weekend, and it was Sunday, and we had a down day, and I thought, I wonder if I can find Norman Dodd. So I just opened up the telephone directory, and I started to call around, and I found a Norman Dodd. I called, and I think it was about my third call. I got in touch with him, asked him if he would be available for an interview. We could talk about the things that he testified before Congress, and he said yes, he'd like to. So it was fortuitous, and in fact that sort of thing happened to me twice in my life, and this was one of them where I just luckily found a person that you would normally not expect to find. And anyway, so we set up the meeting. It was at the offices of the Western Golds Foundation, which I believe was in Alexandria, if I remember the name of the town, not too far from the airport. And the reason I remember that is because it was a nice, quiet office, except every time an airplane would go overhead, it would get pretty loud. So we filmed this interview. We filmed this interview in spurts between aircraft taking off and landing. And so we'd only have maybe 10 minutes or 8 minutes to go, and then okay, cut, and then we had to come back to it. But we were able to edit it all together, so I don't think the viewer was aware of that.
No,
anyway,
I didn't notice that.
Yeah,
I didn't notice that at all. It was very good.
Yeah, we had to cut around it. But anyway, Norman Dodd by that time was quite advanced in age, and he was not in good health. And I just had a sense that if we didn't get his testimony on video, at that time it probably never would be. So we did succeed in getting his story recorded, and it just sat. It just sat in my closet for quite a few years because I didn't think anybody was really interested. Nobody would believe this story, and we had other things to do. And then I think it was about 10 or 12 years later, somebody said, didn't you tell me that you had a recording of Norman Dodd? I said, yes. And I said, gee, we sure would like to see that. So I pulled it out and looked at it, and I was, again, electrified by the information. So to make a long story a little shorter, we finally edited it together and released it. And it's now available through Reality Zone. We call it The Hidden Agenda.
It is a fascinating walk into the endowment. And let me ask you this: do you think that investigation is what sparked off the conspiracies about the Rockefeller, the Carnegies, all those foundations, and their want to manipulate society, their need for it, and also, to rewrite history? I remember that. That's one of my vivid recollections from the interview, is the fact that that they were consciously trying to get these new students, PhD students, out of college and recruit them to be their core of people that would actually rewrite the history books, among other things.
Yes. Yeah, that was the Carnegie Endowment Fund, and I think what was that other foundation?
The Guggenheim.
Guggenheim, thank you, yeah. They were more academically inclined, and they worked together, and they did exactly that. They needed teachers, professors, who would rewrite history to favor this thing called collectivism and to downplay the thing that really built America, which was the spirit of individualism. Mm-hmm. They wanted to make that sound as though that was a thing of the past, a relic of the ancient days. Now it was being replaced by something newer and better, which is called collectivism. And now we're moving into the golden age and so forth. And they needed professors to do that and historians to do that. And, of course, all the existing historians turned them down flat, even though they were offering them money. So they had to go create their own brand new historians, and that's what they did. They recruited them right out of the schools while they were still earning their PhDs. And they created the American Historical Association, or Society, as they called it, funded it very well, and just pushed these fellows right up into key positions in the universities, which were receiving grants from those same organizations. And so it didn't take long before they could literally buy their way right into academia and push these people into prominent leadership positions. And that is what happened to the history books of America. And Norman Dodd explains all of this in quite a bit of detail.
Yeah, it was a fascinating interview, but it just goes to show you the agendas that are behind the scenes that people don't see. It's really not that wacky. When you start to do some research into it, they're pretty vivid, well-defined, well-thought-out, well-planned-out agendas. And if you take a look at us now, boy, we're closer to the Soviet Union than we've ever been,
Well, that's right. There's no question that the United States today and the Soviet Union today could be comfortably merged. In fact, they're doing so right as we speak through the United Nations. They're setting up a true global government, and there will be no particular conflict. After all, we send politicians and police officers to the Soviet Union to train. The former Soviets, the Russians, now send their politicians and police officers and military officers to the United States to train. And we involve in cooperative international treaties to do this, that, and the other thing. But we're well on the way to achieving what the Ford Foundation said they were looking forward to someday.
And what do you think? What do you think the ultimate goal is here, Mr. Griffin? What do you think that the end game is for the powers that be?
It's pretty clear to me, and they've made no bones about it in their writings. The ultimate goal is to create a true global government, but not just any government, a certain kind of one. It's not based on the principles of freedom or liberty, individual rights. It's a system built on the model of collectivism. And they talk a lot about what is collectivism. Collectivism is that root word. You look at all of the modern dictatorial systems such as communism or fascism or Nazism, those are mere manifestations of the underlying philosophy of collectivism. They're all different forms of collectivism. And collectivism is the concept or the ideology in which we assume that the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual must be sacrificed if necessary for the greater good of the greater number. That's the root idea behind it. You'll find that underneath communism, fascism, Nazism, all the isms. And you'll find it increasingly even in America today. That's the concept. The group, the state, that the society is more important than the individual and so forth. We've adopted that very philosophy. So the world is in the grips of collectivism now, and that was the goal of these people. They've already succeeded in conditioning the minds of most people in the world to accept that, and most governments are already built on that model. So now the ultimate goal is just to bring all those little loose governments together and weld them into one global system based on the model of collectivism. That's the goal. And, of course, they know that under such a system, someone has to speak for the group. Someone has to, make the decisions in the name of the group. And they know that's pretty easy to do if you can control the money, and they do indeed. So they will control the media. They will control how people think, the information they get. They will make sure that only compliant politicians are elected into office, and the people of the world will continue to dream and think that they're participating in their own political destiny because they go to the polls and vote. They think, oh, that's wonderful. But they don't realize that the people that they vote for have all been pre-selected. They don't realize that even now the voting machines themselves are being programmed. They don't realize that their own thoughts as to who is a good guy and who is a bad guy on the world scene is conditioned by, the media, which colors everything, puts spin on everything. They don't realize that they have no control over their political destiny at all.
No, they sure don't. And when we come back, folks, from break, we'll continue our conversation with Mr. Griffin, and we'll be taking your phone calls as well. So stay tuned. This is Freedomlink Radio on the Intel Hub News Network. We'll be right back.
Lord, she's crazy about a Mercury.
Did you ever wish that you could have done something while you still had the chance? What will you do if your income ends tomorrow? Or if you lose your home, as many already have? Do you have enough money to survive through an economic depression? If you don't want to gamble with your future, then FreeToProsper.com can help you quickly end your debt problems, protect your property and possessions, and develop a personal strategy to get you through the hard times. Most importantly, you get to keep your money and not pay another cent to creditors. Our program is often superior to bankruptcy, consolidation, or settlement. Visit FreeToProsper.com to find out more. This is your real chance to act ahead, so don't delay. Your future may depend on it. Call 718-615-0123 to learn more. That's 718-615-0123. Or visit FreeToProsper.com today.
There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world.
You are listening to the Intel Hub News Network, crushing the New World Order piece by piece.
In a world where corrupt oppressors and oligarchs have seized control of the populations, total tyranny is amongst us. The burden of humanity rests on our shoulders. The only way out is to expose the global crime syndicate known as the New World Order. Together, we are all one. Together, we are Intel soldiers. The battle for free humanity ensues. Join us in the fight. TheIntelHub.com.
Secure your future. Get your non-hybrid seed pack now. With the looming economic crisis, food shortages, and other toxic disasters, now is the time to be ready. Just click on the Heirloom Organics banner at the top of our Blog Talk Radio page today. Secure your future and the future of your family in hard times. Heirloom Organic Seeds.
Join me, Joe Joseph, John King, and A.C. Griffin, Thursdays and Sunday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern for Freedomlink Radio on the Intel Hub News Network.
The preacher man says it's the end of time, and the Mississippi River, she's a going dry. Is up and the stock market down, and you're only getting mugged if you go downtown. I live back in the woods, you see, a woman and the kids and the dogs and me.
Well, folks, we're back. Anybody with a question or comment, the number to call 646-727-3387, 646-727-3387. And we're back with our guest tonight, G. Edward Griffin. And Mr. Griffin, like we were talking about agendas earlier. Well, one of the agendas, at least that I've seen you investigate most recently, was chemtrails. And my co-host here, A.C. Griffith, has done extensive work over the past decade on chemtrails. And I would love for you guys to be able to talk about that a little bit, because that in and of itself is a huge rabbit hole to jump down, isn't it, Griff?
It sure is, along with all the others.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
You could take any one of these topics and say,
take on that topic, because I thought there were others that were doing such a good job with it. They didn't need my presence on that. I'd stick to issues like the Federal Reserve System and the New World Order and that sort of thing. But anyway, I ran into a couple of film producers that needed some funding for a documentary on chemtrails, and I offered to try and raise some money, and we were successful in doing that. But in the process, I found myself really caught up in the vortex, and all of a sudden here I am on that topic. So I'm coming into it a little bit late. I knew instinctively, I should say, from the very beginning, and by that I mean back in the 1960s when I'm getting my dates wrong. This was, I would say, about 1990 would be the first time I really remember noticing chemtrails. But I knew instinctively, even at that time, that these things were not just plain water or ice crystals trailing behind jet engines. But I just, decided to stay out of that. But anyway, now that I'm into this, I'm forcing myself to become more familiar with the science of cloud formation and what are these chemicals that they are spraying, and why are they doing it, who's behind it, and all that sort of thing. I have to say that I'm still learning. My learning curve is pretty steep right now.
Well, go ahead, Griff. What do you got to? Can you educate them a little bit on the origins of chemtrails?
Well, Ed, I can give you the general background. It's layered in projects now, but it started as one project. And by the way, we're not too far apart in age. I'll be 71. Joe, I didn't tell you that. I'll be 71 here in another few days.
Oh, good Lord, man!
Yeah, but it's nice to meet Mr. Griffin there, who's older than me. I really enjoy meeting people older than me. I really do.
Well, you better hurry up, because we're all fading away,
It does seem that way, doesn't it? The chemtrail project started as a Navy project, American Navy, and it's managed out of Wright-Patterson. And it was started right after Admiral Jeremiah Borda was assassinated in his house. He was chief of naval operations. He opposed the project, and they bumped him off and said he was so ashamed of wearing the wrong medal on his uniform he killed himself.
He had a combat V on when he shouldn't have.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And he had started as an enlisted man in the Navy and worked his way up to chief of naval operations. Well,
right.
They took him out, and then they started the program. Didn't have his objections anymore. That seems to be the trend nowadays. If you don't like what somebody's doing, you kill them. It's been several in the last few months like that. So it was a Navy project, and it was primarily designed to make a subsystem, a sub-computer program within the RFMP, Radio Frequency Mission Planner, RFMP system, function over land terrain. And to do that, they aerosoled a mixture of barium salts. It was 3 different kinds of barium salt mixture in the early days, and they had to rewrite the programs. So I think the University of Texas was given a contract to rewrite computer programs for that system with the barium in the air, and that made the system, the Navy battlefield system, work over land. So they had the over the ocean working before, and now it worked over land, and that was why they did it under the Navy.
Are you saying that these were conduits for radio energy from such installations such as HARP?
No, HARP doesn't have anything to do with it. I think I don't think HARP is the main culprit. I think it's a heater more than anything else. It's old technology, and they put out maps to its front door. If that were science applied militarily in any consequence, they wouldn't advertise it. There's others, though, you need to know about. Maybe we could talk offline here for a few hours in the next few days. There's an awful lot going on. It's not just one thing. It's layered, and they all seem to have connections, either deliberately or in some other way. The aerosol is going on pretty much all over the world. I'm not sure about China and some of those countries. I'm not sure about that, but it
well, we tracked it mostly to NATO countries. There's no question about all of the NATO countries involved, but
right.
There to be South America, much of Asia, and Africa is not involved as far as we know.
Now, you know what's funny about that, Mr. Griffin, and it was like Griff was saying that, all things are started with this intention, and then they say, ooh, well, looky here, look what we can do. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Clifford Carnicom. Have you heard of Clifford Carnicom?
Yes. Oh,
yeah,
yes. I've studied his website and his work for a long time, yes.
Yeah, he's done some fascinating work, and he believes that the origin of the disease Morgellons actually spawns from chemtrailing. And that in and of itself is a fascinating disease. Have you looked into that?
Oh, yes, I've looked into that, and in fact, I've tried to look into all of these issues that converge on the subject of aerosol spraying. And it's a tough thing to do because, as Griff said, there are layered motives. And I have no doubt there are different groups involved that have different motives, and yet they find common cause and work together. Our problem, of course, when we're trying to expose this is to concentrate on something that doesn't require much conspiracy theory, but just some plain observable fact, and about which there can be no debate. So we've tried to focus on the fact that we can measure the chemicals coming out of the skies now after these planes have been flying around, and we can measure high quantities of barium, aluminum, and strontium, and those happen to be exactly the same chemicals that are called for in the patents for the spraying devices.
That's right.
And we can prove that, and we can prove that also is highly damaging to crops It's killing wildlife. It's shortening the lifespan of human beings. It's reducing their fertility. We can prove all of those things. There's no theory about any of that.
What about
we thought we would start with that,
What about Alzheimer's? I mean, we've seen a tremendous jump in Alzheimer's.
About that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Alzheimer's
definitely related to aluminum in the neurons. Yeah, they clog up the electrical passageways through the neurons, and that shows up as faulty memory, among other things.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've got grandparents right now that are suffering with it, horribly suffering with Alzheimer's. I have an aunt with Alzheimer's, and I mean, I even as a child growing up, and I'm 35 years old. As a child growing up, I don't remember even dementia being as prevalent a problem as it is now in the elderly people of today. And I'll even take it a step further. Alzheimer's is now affecting people that aren't even elderly.
Right.
They're in their 40s and 50s.
Yeah, the threshold keeps dropping with each passing year.
Yeah, it's really something else. So I mean, it really is a rabbit hole you jump into when you start investigating the chemtrails. And you're absolutely right. We interviewed a woman by the name of Rosalind Peterson about 3 months ago or so. And one of the things that I like about her is the first thing she'll come out and say is, "I never use the word chemtrails." And I said, well, why is that, Ms. Peterson? And she says, well, because when you say the word chemtrail, you automatically alienate half of the people you're talking to because they think you're a whackball. And I said, okay, I can go with that. I'll buy that. So she says, I call them prolonged or what do they call it? Persistent contrails. Now she runs a website, CaliforniaSkywatch.com and AgriculturalDefenseCoalition.org, and she has such a valuable database of documentation and factual evidence of this stuff going on, and of the weather modification programs that are actively being pursued, not only by government entities, but by these large-scale farming companies, say like your Monsantos, and the names escape me, but the multinational corporations, the mega farms. They're actually manipulating the weather even on a local scale now, and doing so through the use of chemtrails. So it's really not. It's morphed again. It's gone from your NATO operation or military operation to the fact that there's so many players involved in it now. I mean, think about the benefit to the pharmaceutical industry. Oh yeah, let's just go ahead and make a bunch of people sick. This is great. Hey, what do you know? Hey, it's kind of like the Gulf of Mexico. Think about that. Think about the long-term health effects there, Mr. Griffin, of Corexit and all of this oil being spewed into the Gulf of Mexico and then just buried over. When it reached shore, they buried it. They didn't clean it up. They buried it. And it kind of it reminds me of, and I know my listeners, they hear me say this all the time, but they're saying, well, the seafood's safe to eat, no problem. Everything's fine. Guys, the Gulf, hey, no problem. But if you remember after the 9/11 attacks, and Christy Whitman comes on, the head of the EPA, ladies and gentlemen, the air is safe to breathe in New York City. We have air monitors up all over the place. No worries, no problems. And here we are. Let's dial forward 10 years. And people are dropping dead all over New York, and from mesothelioma, from respiratory illnesses, and what other kind of illnesses, because those buildings were gigantic, let's just say, asbestos farms, if you want to call it that. So I mean,
and worse than asbestos too.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So I mean, there's a track record here of lies and deceit. And you have to ask yourself, and I'm going to ask you yourself, what do you think the idea or what is their reasoning behind lying to the public so blatantly?
Well, I'm taking a second to think about that because I want to have a considered answer. I think the obvious answer is that when people lie is that they don't want the truth to be known, obviously. Although I suppose some people are pathological liars, and it's lying just comes so naturally that they don't know how to tell the truth. But I really don't think that applies. I think when government agencies and large corporations lie, as we know they all do that, it's because there's something in the bottom line there that they don't want the public to know about, which would reflect poorly on them and their organization and their performance. So that's pretty clear. They lie because they're trying to hide something. So the question is what?
Mm-hmm.
Usually that's not very hard to figure out. And you take this Corexit thing, for example, and we know that that's very toxic, and it's not only toxic to humans, which seems to be the whole focus, which is serious enough, but it's toxic to marine life. And they're wiping out a huge percentage of the marine life in the Gulf area there. And why would they do that? Would they do that on purpose? Well, the instinct is to say, of course they wouldn't do that. Why would anybody want to wipe out the marine life in the Gulf? And then you say, well, what if they were promoting international control over the oceans and the rivers? And then what if they wanted some justification, some crisis, so we could accept some new treaty which will surrender control off of our own oceans and shores and our rivers to international political control? Would that be a motive for some people? So all you can do is ask questions with something like that. And in most cases, you can find motives for deliberately causing a crisis. We're living in an age today of deliberately created crises. And I think anybody that can't see that is just not reading the news.
No, exactly. I totally agree. But you know, of course, that Corexit is as toxic as Dawn dish soap.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to drink that either, but I think Corexit is a little bit more toxic.
They say it keeps you regular, but you know, outside of that, you know, it really is. Again, there's so much to try and put your hands around, to wrap your arms around it, that all you can do, like you say, is ask questions and speculate, and the many roads that you can go down. I mean, it's really endless, and I'm just at a loss at why there isn't more outrage in this country. Why is there so much lethargy? You know, you look over in Europe, and believe me, Europe is about as socialist as they come. But you have the French that see a 2-year increase in their retirement age, and they shut down their shipping lanes, and the trucks shut down, and the oil refineries stop. Because people understand, or most people understand over there, that without the people, without the individual people, the country cannot operate. And I think Americans need to understand that we hold the power, not them. We do. They like to give the illusion that they do, but really in the end they don't. And it's really a matter of just taking that power back and harnessing it for ourselves. How do you think?
The only way to do that is violence.
Well, is it though? I mean, you can have.
No, there's no other way.
Well, Mr. Griffin, can you respond to that?
Well, I have to disagree with that. Yes, I think that it's easy to jump to that conclusion that there's no other way. But I think right now the enemies of freedom want that. They want us to jump out in the streets and pick up pitchforks and clubs because their weaponry is so much superior to ours. It's not like the American Revolution where our muskets against their muskets. I mean, these people have got weapons of mass destruction and weapons that we don't even know about. It would be not a fair match of any kind. I think your analysis of the people in Europe going out and doing something is a good one because they're not doing anything. They think they're doing something. They're smashing windows. They're stopping transportation. But why do they keep electing the people that do this to them? Why don't they put their focus there instead of in the streets? You see, they'll say, "Well, you're advancing our retirement age, but if you didn't do that, everything would be fine." You see, in other words, they're responding. Everything would be fine if we just had our money. Give us our money. This is not a solution. You see what I'm trying to say? The solution is to get to the core of the problem, which is that our systems have been taken over by collectivists, by one New World Order people that want this global governance on the basis of collectivism. And until we get rid of those people, there is no solution, and including violence, because that's the reason they built those FEMA camps.
That's right. What do you say, Griff?
That's what they want. They expect that.
You can't overcome so-called terrorists. You can't conquer snipers. You can't win in situations like that. If you vote a Democrat, you're going to lose your government. If you put a Republican in, you're going to lose the government. It's hard to tell the difference between the parties today. If you put a Libertarian in, they wouldn't survive in the midst of Democrats and Republicans. There's nobody you could put in Washington that would survive. If he really started to make change, he would be assassinated, and that's the fact of the reality of it.
Well, I agree with that up to the point, and that is that if you put one person in, he would not survive. If you put two people in, they wouldn't survive, or 3 or 6 or 10 or 12. But if you put several hundred of them in, which is what I'm talking about a real movement that would sweep across the nation with hundreds and hundreds of people going and replacing these collectivists. And then I think we have something a little bit different. Do I think that wouldn't have problems? No, I know that would, because the ones entrenched right now would unleash everything they have to prevent that from happening. But I also know that revolt is what they are anticipating, and I think they're really looking forward to that.
Yeah,
they're almost
pushing a button.
Hard place.
Yeah, they're pushing the button.
I think we've waited so long that there is no easy solution right now. It's going to be hard, no matter what. But I really don't think that planned revolt is the answer.
No, and I don't either, because civil disobedience can do the same thing, and also it's like you say, we could go to the polls, but how reliable is that now? With electronic voting machines and look at what happened this last election. There was such an uproar and outrage about Congress. Their approval rating was below 20%. Yet we only saw a 17% turnover in the Congress. So I mean, it's a long uphill battle. There's no short-term solution to it. At least I don't see one happening.
I think we're looking at 1 or 2 generations at best before we can turn this around.
Right,
but we can do it.
Short of a collapse, that's the only thing I could.
Right.
Now, Mr. Griffin, do you have a website that I could direct our listeners to?
Oh, yeah, thanks for asking. I've got a couple of them. We have a commercial site where we sell books and recordings on these topics, and that's easy to remember. It's called Reality Zone. That's realityzone.com. And my book on the Federal Reserve System and the one on cancer and, the one on the United Nations and all the documentaries and audio programs are there. That's realityzone.com. But our think tank website for our organization called Freedom Force International, we have nothing to sell there except ideas. That's called freedomforceinternational.org. And I hope people will come there and spend some time reading the material that we've got available.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, are people able to submit ideas to you or anything to you through that website as well?
Yes, of course. We have a pretty good active forum on that. It's not one of those forums where anybody can, tap into it and plug down their silly ideas and argue with each other. That's not what we try to do. We do try and, select the ideas that, at least according to us, we think they have merit. And if people want to disagree with us, that's fine, as long as it's done in a gentlemanly way and not calling names and so forth. So we have a lot of that. But, there's a forum there, and I think it's a very interesting one.
Fantastic. Well, Mr. Griffin, it was a pleasure having you on the show tonight. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope to have you back real soon if that's okay with you.
That would be fine, and I thank you for inviting me.